what has happened with your three people since the film?
And thanks for that great question. I'm happy when that question gets asked because it suggests that you care about the characters after watching the film. All three of them are doing really well, Bonnie, Ho, and Titi. And it's not even so much that their lives have progressed in any specific way. It's because of this film that things have changed in a really unexpected and kind of surreal way. Jalanan got a theatrical release in April in Indonesia. It became the first documentary ever to go commercial, to go theatrical in Indonesia. This is because we were very persistent and spent months convincing the main theater chain there to give it a chance, because they said documentaries don't sell. But they agreed to give us, finally, they sort of agreed it was a particularly engaging and upbeat film for a social documentary. So they gave us a 3-day window in theaters and said, we'll put it on for the weekend, but then we're taking it off after 3 days. So I said, fine, give us a chance. And we aggressively promoted it through social media with a bit of a very low-budget guerrilla campaign, and we got people to come out to the theaters that first weekend, and it sold out, and the buzz was really good. And we ended up staying on screens for 34 consecutive days, and it was expanded to 5 cities across Indonesia and became a bit of a hit. And consequently, Bonnie, Titi, and Ho kind of became mini celebrities. They became very well known. Their posters were up all over the city. They got invited to television talk shows on national TV, to radio shows, and they kind of became heroes within their community and in popular culture. Then we started getting calls from the governor of Jakarta, from rock and pop bands who wanted to work with them. So they just became these personalities that were kind of larger than their own previous lives. And now they've got all these incredible opportunities. They get invited to play gigs. They get invited to appear in the media still. We've recorded a soundtrack album with them of their music, which we're going to release in about a month. They felt very strongly a few months ago when there was a very tightly fought and dirtily fought presidential election in Indonesia. They felt very strongly that they wanted to support the progressive, liberal, people-oriented candidate, Jokowi, who ended up winning the election just barely. But he was running against a very dark, kind of dictatorial former military general who was probably going to bring Indonesia back about 15 or 20 years in terms of the democracy regressing. So a big cadre of volunteers came out of artists and pop stars and stuff, and Ho, Bonnie, and Titi joined them and ended up campaigning with the presidential candidate who ended up winning. So I was, at this point, I was kind of not involved. The film was done, and I was sitting at home in Bali watching TV and seeing the three of them on the television news appearing with the presidential candidate. So it was completely surreal, and the film developed a life of its own far outside of me and everything that we'd done on screen.
Excellent. Questions?
I should just add, though, there's a little bit of an element of 15 minutes of fame in all this. You know, the film was hot and did well, and maybe it's more like 15 months of fame. But I'm acutely aware. I mean, they're very good friends of mine. I care deeply for them, and I realize that these opportunities are going to dry up, and the gimmick is going to grow old eventually, and they're real people with real lives and families to support. So I personally started up an initiative to raise funds to buy them each a small, humble house in a very simple neighborhood in Jakarta. So I'm now aiming to raise about $50,000 over the next year from anyone who cares to contribute, and we set up a crowdfunding campaign online on a website called Fundraiser and via our movie website, jalananmovie.com. So if anyone's interested in reading about what we're trying to do, you can see it on jalananmovie.com. And I also have souvenir postcards to give out on the way out with a little bit of information on the campaign. So I'm really trying to provide them something that can't be taken away from them in the long term. And I'd been hearing so often from all three of the buskers and from many of their friends about these dreaded, monstrous municipal officers, these police who would grab them, because officially busking is illegal, and they'd grab them and throw them into these grim lockup centers. And I had hours and hours of footage of them talking about this and describing it and expressing their fears. But I really, as a filmmaker, wanted to show rather than tell, and I was dreaming of a day when I could get to witness this in front of my camera, but didn't think it would arrive. And then one day I went to meet Ho at the bus terminal. I was going to shoot some color shots there of some other people, passengers. He was coming to return a T-shirt I had loaned him, I think. And suddenly this truck screeches to a halt right in front of him, and the officers jump off and arrest him right in front of me. So I turn on my camera quickly. That's kind of where the black screen comes in when you're watching. And caught it on camera. And then in the chaos of the moment, I went up to the junior officers from the truck and I said, listen, I'm Ho's good friend. If you're taking him away, I'm coming with him. I want to look out for him. And I guess they were kind of confused and quite junior, and they said, all right, get on the truck. And I got on the truck. And then thanks to the notorious Jakarta traffic jams, we had about an hour and a half to get to the prison. And I had that much time to think about what the hell I was going to say next. And when we got to the prison, within about 5 minutes, the prison director came out and said, you know, who are you and what are you doing in my jail? And I think he was quite surprised to see a white dude shooting in his prison. And by then I had invented a story. I handed him my cell phone and I said, I'm making a film for the Jakarta government, for the municipality, documenting the social services. And here's my phone and the number of Deputy Governor. And please phone him and he'll confirm that my name is Daniel and I'm making a film for the government. And he was all confused. And then I took him to his back office and indulged him for about an hour on camera and let him explain the whole rehabilitation system and kind of earned his trust. And at that point he said, well, he gave me carte blanche to shoot all night in the cell. So it ended up becoming one of the more special scenes in the film.
Did the deputy governor know you?
No, I had never met the deputy governor. He didn't know me, and in fact, had he known about that, I would have been in big trouble. So I was counting on this bluff working. Yeah.
Another question.
You didn't really impose yourself in the film at all. Like, we didn't see you. Why did you kind of, you know, like you were obviously there in all the scenes. Why did you hide? Not hide, but like,
Yeah.
you know, why did you?
That's a great question, and I'm really happy you feel that way because that was my intention. You know, there's a lot of different styles of documentary films, and some of them, you know, like in Michael Moore's film, he's like really at the very center of it and kind of pulling you along. I wanted to do the opposite. I really believed very strongly in Ho and Bonnie and Titi's ability to tell their own story, to have their own voice, to have agency, and I wanted to empower them with that. And I don't think, in the context of this film, I don't think I'm a very interesting person. I don't think you as the viewer need to see or hear me. So I saw myself more as a bit of a fly on the wall, an observational director who was just allowing you to spend this time with them, kind of unfiltered. That said, I don't think there's such a thing as a fly on the wall. They're always responding to the camera in some way. In particular with Ho, I think you can tell he's a real showman. He knows you're there in a way, but his behavior is also quite natural. So yeah, I wanted to give them a voice, and I don't like when foreign filmmakers kind of parachute into a developing country, spend a few months shooting stuff, then explain to you, the viewer, in their voice what to think and feel about what they're seeing. I wanted you to spend an evening with the three of them, and I'm happy to hear that maybe that's what you got.
Right back there. Right, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question. It is typical of the buskers, and I think it's typical of globalization. I mean, any corner of the world you go to, I've been to much smaller, more remote places in Africa where they're playing Western music. The majority of buskers in Jakarta play rock and pop and folk music that is either Western and even in English, or Indonesian rock and pop music that sounds a lot. I mean, it is Western. Musically, it's Western. Some of them play forms of indigenous Indonesian music, like dangdut, if someone knows that, or keroncong, or Javanese music. And there was a bit of Javanese music in the scoring in the scene where we go to Titi's village. But by and large, they play Western music. But one of the things that was really important to me when I chose these three characters to be my leads and looked at their music was I wanted characters who composed their own music and lyrics especially, and I wanted them to have original songs that kind of reflected their lives and their social condition, and spoke something to the condition of Indonesia today, because I thought that would be a very interesting and kind of clever layer of storytelling, a storytelling device to use the songs as part of the arc. So that's why I chose them. But you're right, absolutely. It's it's dominant all over the world, I think.
There's one right at the back there.
Yeah. Her youngest son. Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's kind of a happy ending for Titi, I guess. She ended up going back to her husband. He stopped being cruel to her and beating her. He's, I think, changed fairly positively. They're back together. I think partly it was out of economic necessity to live in that free house that belonged to the grandmother, and they had the kids together. And they've since had another baby together. They have a 2-year-old baby girl who's very sweet. And they seem to be getting along well. And surprisingly, her husband has been very good about accepting Titi's newfound celebrity and realizing that it's probably an asset to the family and not being too envious of it. So that's been pretty cool. And Titi's become a real activist. I mean, she set up an NGO now for street kids. She's very politically active. And she told me for the first time 2 weeks ago, we were kind of half joking about her political activism. And she kind of looked up and said, I think in the next legislative elections in 2019, I might think about running for parliament. So that was, pretty surreal to hear that from someone who was so kind of downtrodden and insecure at the beginning of the 7-year process.
Mm-hmm. Right in front here.
Have there been any changes since you started filming in
I don't think so. Not that I've noticed. There are a bit fewer because they've brought in a modern busway system that's like a dedicated busway corridor that the buskers really aren't allowed into physically. So that's reduced it a bit. But one change I will mention that's been very interesting, that's partly because of this film, is we got a call a couple months ago, shortly after the film screened theatrically in Indonesia, and it was from the assistant to the governor of Jakarta, and this time it was really the governor, not an invention in my phone. And I was really nervous. Why is the governor calling me? Because the whole time I was filming this film, I really got the sense that I was making a subversive movie, and I thought it would be banned because you saw how the government is portrayed. And amazingly, about 2 years ago in Indonesia, a new progressive, liberal, very open-minded, people-oriented governor, a governor is like the mayor of this megapolis, was elected, a guy by the name of Ahok. And he saw the trailer of Jalanan and said, this looks really interesting. This is something I want to see, and I want to show my senior officials because I think it touches on how we need to change our policies in how we treat the urban poor. So they called us, and they called me in for a meeting, and they said, no, the governor's really serious. Don't be afraid. They want to see this. And he convened a gala screening of the film at City Hall in front of 300 of the most senior officials of the Jakarta government. And at the end of the screening, and he was there personally, I thought he was just organizing it. He sat there between me and Boni and Titi and Ho in the front row and watched it from beginning to end, and then had tears in his eyes at the end of the screening, and called a press conference and announced 6 concrete policy changes and how the government was going to treat the marginalized poor. So it was really an amazing moment for all of us. I think it's a little bit hard for the upper classes and the lower classes to communicate at an honest level there sometimes. And it's interesting because when we went theatrical in Indonesia, it was a very interesting experiment because normally in Indonesia, and I think in a lot of the developing world, media is controlled and owned by the rich, and it's produced by the rich, and it's mostly focused on stories of the rich, like soap operas and all the fancy mansions in Jakarta, and the poor are expected to watch this adoringly from their little TV sets in the villages and aspire to be that way. And here in Jalanan, we took 3 marginalized poor, people literally following through the cracks of society, and we cast them on the stage not as victims or objects of a news piece, but as heroes of their own story, as protagonists. And then we turned around and, in a sense, sold that to the rich in the glitzier shopping malls in Jakarta. And places like this, we had middle and upper class Jakartans paying money to go see this story about poor people. and then meeting Bonnie and Ho and Titi outside in the lobby. So we kind of were messing with people's heads in that way, but also started a bit of a dialogue. So these wealthy people came out of the theater saying, wow, we never knew that this social class existed, that people live this way, but also that they're so wise and so smart and so funny and so happy, because so many of the rich people in Jakarta, like rich people in a lot of places, are really stressed out and not that happy with their lives. So it was this weird mental exercise that I really enjoyed instigating, and was quite fun.
Thank you all.
Thank you so
and
much.
Vote, vote, vote.
Yeah.